Good morning. I'm Jackie Weaver, the co-chair of the art program and an art faculty member here at the College of DuPage. And I'd like to welcome you all to the 7th event of our 2021-2022 Visiting Artist Series. The series is a collaboration between the Cleve Carney Museum of Art, the Departments of Art, Architecture, and Photography at COD. And I also want to give a quick shout out to Paul Thompson in Multimedia Services for making it possible to hold this event virtually today. For those of you joining us for the YouTube live premiere of this talk in our screening room, our artist Nyugen Smith is here live to answer questions about the work in the chat box throughout the lecture. So please click on the Watch in YouTube button to post your questions there. Today, we are joined by the very talented artist and rising art star, Nyugen Smith, who I have the great pleasure of introducing. Nyugen E. Smith is a Caribbean-American interdisciplinary artist based in Jersey City, New Jersey. Through performance, found object sculpture, mixed media drawing, painting, video, photo, and writing, Nyugen deepens his knowledge of historical and present-day conditions of Black African descendants in the diaspora. He is most known for his signature series, Bundle House, which he has been working on since 2005. Nyugen holds a BA in Fine Art from Seton Hall University and an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. In a catalog essay for Listening to the Echoes of the South Atlantic for an exhibition in Oslo, Celine Wendt sets the scene for one of Nyugen's performances. She writes, Smith's deep connection to his ancestral roots permeates his entire practice and is particularly evident in his performances. For his participation in The Sea is History, he engaged the audience in a performance that captured the poetic justice of him occupying and taking control of a European space. The stench of colonialism hung heavily in the air. Before he even entered the room, his presence was forcefully announced by the pungent smell of Norwegian dried cod. Walking slowly and rhythmically through the museum, dressed in a long, timeless robe, his steps were punctuated by the ringing of a handheld bell. As soon as the audience gathered around him, he summoned witnesses through intense gestures and gazes to join him for a swig of Norwegian cod liver oil. He must have had help from the spiritual realm to get so many people to drink from that flask. One couldn't help but feel the strong sense that Smith's ancestors really were right there with us. In this case, his command of a handheld bell was seemingly all it took to invoke ancestral spirits into the space. I really love this description of the way Nyugen's performance capture you, pull you right into this work and engage all of your senses. That was certainly my experience with his work when we were in grad school together here in Chicago. I also remember that he was always in the studio and he pulled more than a few all-nighters on campus because he was right in the middle of an installation or experimenting with some kind of media or material that was brand new to him. So we're really happy to have you here today. Nyugen, thank you so much for being with us. It's great to see you again, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciate it. It's great to be with you here, and thank you for the invitation to join the DuPage community. And really excited to be here and share my work and ideas and engage in conversation with everyone that's present. So I'm going to begin with just giving you a little bit of a background, which kind of sets the stage for my trajectory as an artist. It brings together and centers some of the ideas and the ideas of aesthetics that are all part of my work. So this is my father. My father, Michel Nigel Smith, is from Haiti, which is an island in the Caribbean, which shares a border with the Dominican Republic, as you can see the border here. My mother is from Trinidad and Tobago, and this, ironically, is where I spent most of my formative years growing up as a kid. My parents were divorced when I was really young. And so I went to Trinidad to live with my mother's family. My mom stayed here in the United States. And so one of the things that I learned and came to understand later on in my career is how much the environment the environment in Trinidad played a pivotal role in the way that I see materials, the way that I understand materials, and the way that I utilize materials in my work. This is the backyard of our family home in Trinidad. This photograph was taken probably around 1980. So this is my uncle and my grandmother, and they are in the backyard building something for the chicken coop, which is back here. So one of the things that I came to understand later in life was that much of what was constructed, as we can see in this photograph here, in the lived environment, so much of what was constructed in the lived environment in Trinidad was created out of found materials. So people salvaging materials from all different places to bring them together to create some sort of structure that provided some sort of purpose. And in this example, the purpose is to create a home for the chickens that my grandmother kept. As I started to continue to make work and really think about place and space, I really started to be brought back to thinking about my family ancestry in the Caribbean. And I became really interested in aesthetics in the Caribbean, other artists who were working in the Caribbean region when I discovered a magazine was founded called Ark Magazine. And that was a magazine that was specifically directed towards artists of the Caribbean and the diaspora. And from engaging with this publication, I started to get really excited and encouraged to continue to make work that explored my Caribbean identity. And so it was at that time that I also made the conscious shift to identify myself as a Caribbean American artist, knowing that and feeling that so much of my Caribbean heritage had informed or is currently informing my artistic practice, the way that I see the world and process the world, the types of food that I'm really interested in, the music that I'm really interested in, and the types of travel and trips that I actually take. This was one of the first explorations of thinking about maps. And this piece here is a tongue-in-cheek approach. It's called House Borderlines #3, ILD Triba Martica. And it is really a tongue-in-cheek approach and really thinking about the way that some people speak about the Caribbean as though it is a monolithic thing. So as we know, the Caribbean has so many different cultures, so many different languages, so many different festivals and customs all throughout the Caribbean. And so here I am taking 5 different Caribbean islands and smashing them together. And finding some sort of, as I rotate the outlines of these Caribbean islands, finding the one position that I would like to kind of keep to create this new fictitious island, which is a combination of these 5 places. So as a result of that, we come up with the portmanteau, which is the title of this piece, which is the new island, Triba Martica, Trinidad, Cuba, Martinique, Haiti, and Jamaica. Here is another map that was created, Borderlines #6, Imembe, and this is actually the island of Hispaniola, which is the name that Christopher Columbus gave to the island when he arrived there. The indigenous name is Haiti, and that, if I remember correctly, means the land of hills, of high hills or tall hills. And here is Haiti, and here is the Dominican Republic on this side. This map, interestingly enough, is turned 90 degrees counterclockwise. And the reason it's in this position is because when I started to, when I printed out the map to begin working on this piece, I left the studio, I came back into the studio, and it was facing me in this direction. And when I looked at it, it looked like a figure kind of running across the ocean. And I thought that that was a beautiful way to begin to engage with this particular work and the ideas that I wanted to explore in this particular piece. My work itself, as Jackie mentioned, a big part of my work is a series titled Bundle House. And Bundle House literally translates into bundling materials together into making a house. And this speaks to the idea of those who are forced to flee their home because of some sort of event, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's war, famine, genocide, and having to rebuild those people having to rebuild their lives from things that remain. So literally bundling materials together to make a living structure, and metaphorically pulling the pieces back together again in order to start life anew. And so I wanted to really investigate this idea of what does it mean to start anew with this particular work? And where am I starting anew? I'm starting anew with this new configuration, this new orientation of the island, which looks like a figure. So I'm starting with this idea of that's embedded in Haitian voodoo, which is the one of the major and the official and official religion of the Caribbean island. To think about a new Loa or deity for the Caribbean island. And I really was thinking about this new deity as this deity, and this figure here is a representation of this deity. And this deity is a new deity for reparative justice in the Caribbean island, for reconciliation between Haiti and the Dominican Republic after many centuries of turmoil and conflict between the two. So I wanted to kind of dive into that history and bring those elements into this work. Here's a detail of this particular piece, Emembe. And in this detail, you can see some of the bundle houses closer, right? So if I was to go back one, you see the many bundle houses that populate these maps. And then as you get a little closer, you get a chance to see what these pieces actually look like. Each section of the map is actually created separately and then brought together and hand stitched with needle and thread. And so these stitches here is what forms the border. You see these stitches that go through the entire thing, and that correlates to the name borderlines. And really, I'm thinking about these ideas of the way that colonialism has, through colonialism, how spaces have been divided to the benefit of the colonizer, without regard for the history of the space, the people who live there, and the kind of natural borders perhaps that had existed before. And so when I'm creating these borders with needle and thread, I'm thinking about the delicacy of borders, the fragility of borders, the sometimes the ineffectiveness of borders, as these are obviously porous, where movement can actually happen in between these spaces here. I'm also interested within these maps to bring in elements of the flora and fauna and history and culture, folklore of the particular spaces that I'm sharing. And in this particular map, I'm tapping into the Haitian tradition of creating voodoo flags. And voodoo flags are primarily, traditionally primarily constructed using sequins. And the sequins are essentially the color that enables the creator to create pictorial images that speak to the folklore, speak to the deities that are involved or included or invoked within these particular voodoo flags. I also create sculpture of these bundle houses. And just like with the drawings, the bundle house sculpture starts with a foundation. With those drawings in the maps, they always start with the line. with the sculpture, I'm actually starting with a framework. So the framework is essentially a kind of a crude construction that's on the inside of this, where I'm using wood, I'm using wire to create the actual support structures, to which I attach like fabrics, other found materials. So for example, in this piece, you've got wood, fabric, acrylic paint, you've got sequins, bells, beads, rubber, metal, all of these different things that I combine to actually construct this bundle house, where I imagine that people would actually inhabit. Just as with these maps, I started to create using these cartographic symbols as locations and places where specific events have occurred within the location. So I've actually started to create these symbols and connect them with the sculpture also. So in this particular instance, they function as kind of like landing pads or resting places for the bundle house themselves. So I'm thinking about places like, if, you know, for as an example, if this bundle house existed in a place where climate change has affected the place so much so that there's an incredible amount of flooding, these landing pads essentially kind of, in my mind, kind of act as these kind of flotation devices for the bundle houses as well. Here's another bundle house. I call them FS, and the FS stands for freestanding. So that's kind of code for me and for the public, those who are researching my work, to know that the FS stands for a freestanding bundle house. It's not something that's drawn. It's not something that's collaged onto a wall-mounted work, but it is a freestanding piece. So whether that is a small sculpture or whether that is a large sculpture installation. So the FS mini meaning small, number 7. One of the challenges and the things that is really important to me as I think about creating these sculpture is that because they're made up of found materials, it is a challenge to figure out ways to bring all of these disparate parts together in a way that's cohesive, in a way that is pleasing to the eye, in ways that that allow this piece to all of the individual parts to kind of metamorphosize, to be able to serve a new function within the sculpture itself. So the challenge ultimately at its core is to use these found materials and integrate them within the sculpture in a way where they lose their individual identity and come together to serve a specific function within the construction of this particular house. And that's the fun part for me. The other thing that as we just look at architecture here, right, as Jackie had mentioned in the beginning, architecture being an important part of my practice and interest in my practice. I always say that if I was to come back in another life, I'd come back either as a chef or as an architect. And depending how this art career goes, by the time I'm out of here, maybe I'll come back again as an artist. We'll see. But as it relates to my interest in architecture, it is not necessarily of studying, you know, formal movements of architecture or going into a deep study of architectural materials or anything like that, but it's more about the kind of study that happens by, you know, moving through environments and documenting, taking photos of particular spaces, perhaps video of a space if the kind of movement within a space is kind of resonates with me and I want to capture and I want to kind of document that through video, but really thinking about these kind of informal ways of studying. And so my interest in early 19th century architecture in the Caribbean, but specifically Trinidad and Tobago, led me to the discovery of these drawings, where we're actually able to see a case study house from the early 19th century, Trinidad and Tobago. And fascinatingly enough, during my time of growing up in Trinidad, there were quite a few more of these type of houses that still existed. The floor plan, where we're looking at the floor plan here for that same drawing that we just saw. And so for this particular drawing of this case study house, here is the, well, okay, before we go to there, we're looking right now at an installation where I used that drawing to, in an exhibition where I was asked to think about, all of the artists would think about home. And for me, I had just come back from Trinidad during that time. This date is actually 2015, that's correct. So I'm looking at this vinyl, I'm studying this vinyl, I'm studying the space, I'm looking through the window when I was invited to do a site visit, and I'm thinking about the fact that I can see Jersey City through here. This is at a local community college. And this community college, Hudson County Community College, is a place where many first generation Americans are actually attending college. So the majority of the students that attend this college, their parents were not born in the United States. And so I'm looking through the window of this gallery at the college, through Jersey City, and then across the river to Manhattan. And so we have this kind of layers of view, I should say, like layers within the depth of vision, right? The depth of field. And so I was thinking to myself, like, that about that idea of the way that we see the world is highly dependent on our upbringing and the things that we learned at home. And so I thought it might be interesting to use this, this drawing of the case study house to put that in front as the way that, as the lens through which I see the world. And then also too, in thinking about the fact that my family migrated to New Jersey, Hoboken, New Jersey, and then to Jersey City. And then New York City was always this kind of aspirational place. And still is this kind of aspirational place for many people around the world, but specifically thinking about people from the Caribbean, a lot of times, like, they won't say New Jersey, they'll just say New York, because that's the kind of place that New York has kind of embedded. New York has embedded itself in the aspirational mind and heart of people all over the world. Here's the floor plan for that house. So what I did here was took that same drawing, the architectural drawing of the floor plan for that case study house, and I used plastic tablecloths, thinking about tablecloths that I would have seen growing up in Trinidad. People all around the Caribbean have these types of plastic tablecloths with the flowers on them and such, but I wanted to kind of think about my lived experience and bringing that tablecloth into the home, into the lived structure, and then adding soil. This is soil that I sourced locally in Jersey City, but placing that on top of the tablecloths to create the line drawings, right? So we think about the home, the kitchen as the kind of center of the home, the food as an indicator or signifier of culture. This was one of the times that I began to really think about utilizing older ideas. I should say, like, utilizing and deploying older ideas within exhibitions and special projects. And I started that mainly because I had so much going on at the time, and I knew that I didn't have the time to create new work for that exhibition. So I asked myself, what do I literally have that I can tap back into in order to show, but something that is new to the public, and something that would offer me the opportunity to also return to investigate a little bit more. And so, when we think about the ideas that we have and things that we put in the background, sometimes those ideas are years later, they become more relevant and even stronger if we look back into our archive and our catalog, into the ideas that we perhaps have put behind us. As we think about location, about space and place, I spoke a lot about my Trinidadian side that has really informed me. And so this body of work, Master My Language, has really come out of thinking about that over my lived experience, and up until a large portion of my life, I have not really been connected to my Haitian ancestry, my Haitian side. And so I wrote a poem when I was in grad school about my disconnect from Haitian ancestry. Writing is also a big part of my practice, as Jackie shared in the introduction. And so I wrote this poem about my disconnect from my Haitian ancestry. And after I wrote the poem, I said that I really wanted to kind of continue to explore it a little bit more. What does an art object of this poem, or related to this poem, or derived from this poem, look like? And so first thing I decided, all right, let's just literally make it where we can read the poem as an object. And I had this old piece of rubber, and I started to cut the poem out of these strips of rubber. So cut lines of poem out of the strips. So there are multiple strips that contain the text. So if you held the strip up, you could read the poem vertically across all of the strips. So this is kind of a mass, a jumble of these strips of rubber that are placed together. And this is its final iteration, in the way that I decided that I really love to see this particular mass of rubber text in a bowl, on top of plastic grass, on top of a wood base. And this bowl itself is like, growing up, once again, thinking about Caribbean aesthetics and Caribbean home, these types of what we called in Trinidad enamel bowls, enamel cups. And enamel really just speaks to the paint that was used to paint the plates and bowls and things like that. So we have this bowl here that I found at a thrift shop. When I saw it, immediately brought me back to my childhood in that particular space, thinking about food, thinking about home, thinking about space. And ironically, maybe not ironically, but yes, factually, these vessels exist all throughout the Caribbean and all throughout the world. But I'm speaking specifically, going back to the Caribbean again. My dad confirming that, they did have these types of utensils and plates and cups and things like that. So bringing the language into this vessel that speaks about food and home and kitchen and place and history, I thought it was kind of fitting to put this jumble, right, of mound, almost looks like food, spaghetti or some sort of noodles, something like that, inside of this, right? Then putting it on top of grass, thinking about the lushness of the Caribbean space. After I started to create this work, I'm really looking at the negative space that were formed when I cut the letters out, right? So when I cut out like the letter S, there are these curves that exist. When I cut out sections from the letter O, there are like these circles that come from the center of the letter O, right? So all of these different beautiful forms started to emerge as I began to cut the text. And when I looked at them, they kind of resonated to me as a foreign language. And so I was thinking to myself, wow, this is like a beautiful correlation and parallel between this foreign language that I'm seeing here in these forms and Haitian Creole as a foreign language to me, because I don't speak the language. And so in seeing that connection, I wanted to explore that a little bit more. So I'm saying to myself, aha, what would it look like to try to learn this language as though I'm trying to learn Haitian Creole. And so I went back to this kind of Western pedagogical model of having these lined paper with the red line margin and copying the original text, something that we did as children growing up in Western education system, of copying the printed text as a way to learn how to write, learn how to read the language, and specifically speaking about the English language. And within these works too, now I'm also bringing in these other elements of learning, right? The act of learning. So whiteout, for example, the yellow, thinking about highlighting yellow, highlighting in yellow the areas that need focus, that need attention. Also using the smudges, right? Thinking about the way that sometimes, especially as kids, when we're learning to write and things like that, how messy sometimes the pages were, from the hand moving across the graphite, from, you know, trying to erase when you didn't have an eraser, or your eraser is not that great. Okay, here's an installation view of a few of these Master My Language works on paper in exhibition. And after creating them on paper, I then started to look at them and feeling as though they were like these sonic objects, like they had sound. And so I wanted to know, what do these sound like? And so I partnered up with a former colleague of mine who has a degree in music, and avant-garde jazz is his specialty. And we started to develop a musical notation system for this series. And these are the two that we've scored so far. So listeners can actually, visitors can actually listen to the score for each one of these. This book has been a pivotal text in my practice, especially as it relates to performance. And this was introduced to me by my mentor, friend, former professor, Denenge Akpem Deist, who was a professor of mine at both Jackie and I's at School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And this book, Black Theater, Ritual Performance in the African Diaspora, has really changed the trajectory of my performance practice, and really has helped me to also think about the way that I engage with my installations, especially at this moment. This is a performance, when I think about place, right? We talked about place as in the region, Caribbean region, talked about maps as a kind of locator of these places, talk about language as another kind of locator, another signifier of space, heritage, culture, and the exploration of language through the different forms, having the sculptural piece, having the written poem piece, having the mixed media works on paper, and then having the sound, right? So all of these different layers that come from the pursuit of and the engagement with one idea. So how many ways can I utilize an idea to continue to learn from that initial thought? I believe that there are ways that we learn about something through reading, obviously, through writing about it. We learn about hearing, right? The kind of stories, or listening to others who have expertise or knowledge in a particular area, and then also through the body. And so my performances serve as a way for me to have a deeper understanding of the things that I'm really interested in. And it also brings into my practice the really important aspect of play. And so having a theater background from my undergraduate years has really given me a lot of important tools that I utilize now in my performance practice, which centers this idea of creating a shared imaginary space, something that the Caribbean writer Edouard Glissant speaks about, as well as to engage in this notion of play and collaboration. This piece is was the first collaborative performance that I did with my dear friend Marvin Fabian, who is now in the realm of the ancestors. We created this performance in 2017, lest we forget to think about the effects of climate change within the Caribbean region. So I wrote this speech, which is a combination of text that I kind of sourced from online that spoke about specifically about Hurricanes Maria and Hurricane Irma that had really devastated so much of the Caribbean in 2017, Caribbean and mainland US, when we think about Miami as a city that is often affected by climate events. And so this particular piece here, I'm compiling all of this text that I'm sourcing online and chopping it up in the kind of way that the Dada artist did with poetry, to create a speech that talks about the urgency of climate change and the urgency of the Caribbean being ground zero for climate change. Marvin Fabian created the soundscape, bringing in elements of music from the Caribbean, such as dancehall, reggae dancehall, bouillon, which is music from his homeland of Dominica, thinking about techno music and other types of electronic music that come from Europe as well. So he fuses all of those to create these dynamic soundscapes through which we made the performances. Here was our second collaborative performance, lest we forget, in Puerto Rico in 2018. And as a part of my performance practice, I'm always engaging, or I would say most of the time I'm engaging with what I call witnesses, people who are present for the performance. I consider them witnesses. And I'm engaging the witnesses. The witnesses essentially help to create the performances. And without them, the performance would be very different. And so I come in with an idea of how I will want to begin the performance, perhaps some things I want to do in the middle, perhaps how I want to end it. And this is even in a collaborative performance, I still operate in that way. So with Marvin and I, we had a kind of understanding of how that moves. We also had an understanding of the things that needed to happen when certain sounds came in, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the beginning part of the performance where I actually had witnesses kind of untangle these banners because they were all bunched up together unintentionally. And so it was a beautiful task of being present with them while they actually work together to untangle this mass and mess of these pendants before we can even begin. So them kind of working together, trusting each other, helping each other out, not knowing how it was going to unfold, and then realizing once they untangle the pendants, to see how their efforts have helped to shape the performance, I believe also keeps this experience within their hearts and within their minds. Tracy War, a writer and scholar, thinks about art and writes about art. One of the things that I came across a writing of hers from during my time in Barbados, she wrote that she'd rather have her work leave monuments, I'm paraphrasing here, leave monuments in the hearts and minds of people as opposed to some sort of physical object that's left in the midst of the people. So I believe that through engaging and having the witnesses help to create the performances themselves, that is something that resonates with them for a long time to come. This is the culmination of the performance. This is the performance that Marvin and I did in 2019. This was our last collaborative performance together. We created this at the Peréz Museum at the invitation of the Peréz in relation to an exhibition that I was a part of there titled The Other Side of Now, Foresight in Contemporary Caribbean Art. And it was curated by Dr. Marsha Pierce, who is a scholar, writer, and artist herself in Trinidad. and Maria Elena, who is curator at the Peréz Museum in Miami. And so we created this performance here in the outside of the museum as an extension of the object that I had on view, which thinks about this, created this kind of fictitious narrative that the Caribbean plate, which is the tectonic plate that the Caribbean rests on or is included on, the idea was that the Caribbean plate broke away from its current location. And as it moved west or moved away into a new uni ocean, the Caribbean plate rose up out of the water. And so all of these Caribbean islands that were once separated by bodies of water are now together on one landmass. And the kind of beauty that that in my mind that it would emerge from that, such as like the fusion of languages to create new languages, the fusion of cultures and festivals to create new festivals, and all of these other beautiful things that would happen. Of course, it would have its problems, but at the core of that and the celebration of that is all of the magic that would happen as a result of the fusion of cultures and these experiences of all of these different Caribbean island nations being brought together in one space. And so this performance that took place on the grounds of one of these bundle house installations really explored that idea. Site is very important, as I say, to my work. This was a work that was created in Barbados in 2017 during my residency there. And this residency is actually on a former sugar plantation, which is now converted to a dairy farm. However, my intention there was to really think about and to make work that explored that particular land there. And in relation to Barbados as a whole, as one of the, as a place that had the most sugar mills per square mile in the Caribbean during slavery. And so this particular location still has the carcass of the sugar mill that's here. And so I made work on these grounds constantly. And here I am kind of going through these exercises of thinking about labor, thinking about the way that African descendants labored on this particular land, thinking about the way that they loved on this particular land, the way that they shared and grew families and all of the different experiences that they had here. They died on this land, they suffered on this land. And so here I am engaging in an action to kind of think about the labor and what their bodies, minds, and spirits went through during that time. Resting on top of a mound. Many of the locations around Barbados where that are marked as the mass graves of African descendants have these mounds that are still very prevalent. And one of the reasons for that is that Barbados, unlike many of the other Caribbean islands, is predominantly like coral rock. And so there isn't that much soil or dirt, if you will, within the landscape. So many of the burials that happened kind of like they weren't able to dig very deeply. So you still see these mounds of places where in many burial grounds across the island. And so here I am engaging in this action on top of a mound of soil and mixed coral that was placed on the grounds of the residency. And so I'm engaging in this action of putting my body on top of these mounds as though my body was within the mound itself. Engaging in thinking about ancestors and ancestor worship and ancestor reverence, but also thinking about these connections with very specific cultural practices and cultural beliefs throughout the African diaspora. So in this image here, I'm thinking about the what is known as Ibeji in Yoruba, from Nigeria, from Yoruba spiritual practice, Yoruba culture in Nigeria, where twins are sacred. And so this was also created in Barbados, as I found this wardrobe that was downstairs in the basement of the house that I stayed in. And I started to engage with that and imagine myself as a twin, and what does this mean, right? This kind of wardrobe being tucked away in the basement in this house on a former plantation, kind of creating these stories in my mind of who or what used this wardrobe. And now I'm bringing back the kind of tapping into this idea of the ancestors or spirits returning through the wardrobe to create this piece. So really just having a great time experimenting with light, experimenting with the structure, and how many ways or in what ways can I represent a duality of self within this piece itself. And obviously what I've done here is like, it wasn't really two of me. So obviously what I've done is Photoshopped it, right, in order to bring these two together. And that was also a interesting kind of approach and practice for me as well. Mr. Johnson with the horses on that same grounds of the residency. And every day I would pass the horses and really start thinking about the notion that in Haitian voodoo and also in other African-based spiritual practices, they believe that once the deity comes into the body of the human, that person is now being possessed by the spirit. They say that the body or the person becomes the horse for the spirit. And so every day passing these horses, that kept coming to mind, the horse for the spirit, the horse for the spirit. And so I wanted to engage with that idea. And so what I thought to myself was this idea of like, wow, how can I physically become the horse for the spirit? Okay, and then the spirit needs, I'm the horse, the spirit needs something to be able to rest, to be able to ride this horse. And so I thought, hey, it needs a saddle. So I came up with this idea of the spirit saddle. So here's a mock-up of Photoshop, just taking a horse saddle, thinking about what can I use from these other materials that are used in conjunction with controlling a horse to create a garment or the structure that would essentially support the spirit saddle. So I thought about the bridle on the horse's face and how that could perhaps be modified to create the structure for the saddle. And so once I got back home, I went to some friends who have a leather production company, and met with them. I asked them if they can help me think about this bridle. So they had one of their suppliers send them a bridle, and met with them to talk about creating this bridle, a larger custom version of this bridle that would actually fit on my body. And then from there, I went to another friend who's a sculpture professor at a local university to weld a steel frame to connect it to this bridle to be able to then attach the saddle to that. And here we have the development of the spirit saddle, right? So now I'm able to wear this and be able to move around and think about the spirit riding this body. And so with this idea of continuing the idea of collaboration, continuing the idea of learning from and within a very specific space, I went back to Martinique, one of my favorite places in the Caribbean, have many friends there, and it has been really pivotal for me in terms of my development as an artist and specifically my performance practice. And so I went there to study with choreographer, dancer, Christiane Emmanuel in 2018. to develop a performance or develop performance movement vocabulary for this particular performance. So when Christiane and I met, when I went there for residency and performance festival, I learned about her practice of dance and choreography and how connected to nature and the history of African descendants that her practice is rooted in. And so when I knew that I wanted to develop a kind of a dance vocabulary for this performance, there was no doubt that I was going to go find Christiane Emmanuel and go and spend time with her. We spent 2 weeks together every day for 2 weeks, Monday through Friday together. And the weekends I'd train on my own, probably about 5 hours, 6 hours a day, training in this space, the La Maison Rouge, which is a dance studio that she has established there in Fort-de-France in Martinique. This leads me now to my final, one of my most recent projects, and is a music project that I've created in collaboration with my brother. It's called Algorithm, a Bundle House Sonic Relief Pack. And this album was created it actually began when we went into lockdown and the pandemic here in the Northeast in 2020. And I didn't have it within me to get in the studio to make drawings and paintings. And so I turned back to writing again, and poetry and sound. And so created this album, which is essentially an outpouring of emotions, of thoughts, of wishes, of hopes for the future, and thinking about collective unity and moving together out of this period of time that have affected us all in so many different ways, but really specifically thinking about the experience of Black and Brown people here in the United States, but also within the African diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora too. So within this box set here, which the album comes in, there are other elements that are still connected back to my artistic practice, which connects back to these topics of performance, topics of history, art, culture, rhythm, music, folklore, and it is available for the public to sample and also collect on the website algorithmmusic.com. All right. So thank you so much for your time and enabling me to be able to share these, I guess, essentially a journey through my life and my creative practice, and looking forward to engaging with your questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nyugen. That was really excellent. And I would encourage everybody to check out the website where you can watch some of the performances that Nyugen was talking about. You can listen to the music. There's just a lot to check out on the website as well. So definitely make your way over there. We do have time for just a couple of student questions. I know a lot came in. Hopefully a lot of people were asking some questions in the chat, but maybe we'll just get to 2 or 3 of these before we let you go. So the first one, let's see, related to performance. How have you built the confidence to perform such powerful performances? Do you have any advice for students in this area?
The confidence came from, first of all, the invitation. Someone invited me to make a performance. And I love to give names because I think it's important. This is a historical record that we're creating here, essentially. And so when people are accessing these historical records for posterity or for research or whatever it is, to have names and connections. So Rebecca Jampole, who herself was a performance artist, and she began a space for artists to have solo presentations of their artwork in Newark, New Jersey at that time. And it's called Solo's Project House. And when I did a solo show, she invited me to make a performance. And so she said, you know, I think it would be great if you made a performance. Let's talk about that a little bit, what it might look like, et cetera. And I was like, but my theater background has really helped me, given me the confidence, actually, you know. So I say to those who are interested in performance, study, you know. So if there's a certain type of performances that you resonate with, like, look at those performances, read about those performances. If it's not like the traditional kind of performance art as many of us kind of imagine in our head, if it's more like theater, if it's more like dance, look at those things, you know, to help inform you in the way that you move forward in making your performances.
So one more question. Your work is very research-based, and particularly like this emphasis on the lived experience. So for people who are approaching your work and might not have that context, what do you want the audience to walk away with, even if they're not educated about all of these subjects, these really complex subjects that you're working with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always say that one of the things that I strive for, and I don't know if I'm always successful at that, is to create space or have space exist within the work that others can find themselves. With the work itself, whether it's materials, right? We've all come across an old piece of cloth. When I'm creating these objects, I'm often thinking about that which is universal, that can help people to enter into the work and to find themselves within the work. With performance, there is something about sound that allows me to be able to connect with others and help them to find a place within the work to connect. The kind of interactions, like one-to-one interactions or group interactions within the performances themselves, where they're also living the experience of being a part of the creation of the work. And so that is something that they understand, their own experience within the making of a work. And at the same time, there are aspects of the opacity, right, of the inability for people outside of a particular cultural context to be able to understand. There's a certain aspect of that opacity that I also am really interested in creating, because there's one thing to say that we're making work for everyone, for the masses, and there's also another thing to say that the work is also specifically intended to do something or to activate something within a particular community. So I'm also interested in those areas where people don't understand or can't penetrate the work as well.
Right, and that shows up in the Master My Language, some of those images as well. Thank you for that. Thank you for your time and sharing all of your work with us. I really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us today. And thanks everybody who's joining us at home or in the classroom. Thanks to everybody who's contributing questions in the chat. This lecture will be archived on our website. So if you go to the ccma.org, just look for the Visiting Artist Series tab, and you'll be able to find the archive to watch this again or share it with a class. Our next event is on April 13th at 11 a.m. and that will be an artist lecture by the artist John Beal. And we look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks.